Good morning, Chris. How are you doing today?
Hi, Ron. Doing great. Looking forward to diving into advanced inventory logic for buying groups and group purchasing organizations today with you.
Yeah, I agree. This is a great topic. Let's go ahead and first off, let's just talk briefly about what advanced inventory logic is, because buying group inventory can be very different, right? Because of the sheer quantity of either the bulk purchases themselves or the vendors. So why don't you go ahead and dive in and talk a little bit about the logistics of advanced inventory and what that can mean across an organization?
Absolutely. Well, thanks. And yeah, so this is a really interesting topic because most buying groups and group purchasing organizations tend toward doing some form of drop ship or some form of multi warehouse inventory model. Typically, it's going to be a drop ship type of model, though. And it you can think of it as a kind of distributed inventory and being able to represent that with the lead times, with the appropriate kind of buffer of the inventory. And you're dealing with a situation in most cases where the buyer is looking for different products from different vendors, essentially. So these different vendors may have different lead times, different shipping capabilities. Maybe they have different kind of buffer of inventory. And if you're not careful as a buying group, you may end up representing items as in stock that actually are not. And this can be extremely frustrating and even cause a problem, like a fundamental problem with a buyer, a member of your group purchasing organization or buying group. If they order something, they plan on it being there, it needs to show up on time with rare exceptions, if any exceptions. And so it's really important that this advanced concept be in place because we really, have at the kind of baseline or the foundational element of the buying group this concept of integrity and credibility of the information within the system. So, if anything, what we want to do within our platform is enable you and your organization to seamlessly leverage this data in an intelligent way and do it in a way that works for the members, for the buyers, so they can see the information transparently, very easily. And in most cases, that's really the name of the game is transparency with some amount of buffer. So we want to be able to represent inventory for each of the different vendors, possibly give the buyers options to purchase or source from different vendors for the same product. There could be different distributors, there could be different warehouse locations. And we want to, as the buying group, the group purchasing organization, we want to enable our members. Okay, so our job with the software is to make that easy for you and ultimately put the governance in place so that the vendors who are selling, they have the ability to keep their information up to date and they have incentive to make sure that it's kept up to date, or they are kind of removed or lowered in the search results. Possibly their items that they're selling are kind of marked as low reliability. Maybe we increase the lead time, reduce the amount of kind of items that we show in inventory because their information isn't credible, this kind of a thing. And so, like, ultimately, though, whenever a buyer is going into your platform and they are looking to purchase 1,000 items or 50 items that need to be delivered urgently, this advanced inventory logic is what is going to give them that sense of security that, yeah, I might be getting a great price here, but it is absolutely going to be delivered on time. And then the other thing too on this, Ron, is looking at the locations and the lead times. A lot of our buyers or members within buying groups, they have multiple locations that they need to do a split shipment to. In many cases, there will be a group purchase that will need to occur. So the group members, the members who are participating in the purchase, will need to do split shipping. And so again, this inventory logic is really important because the shipping cost and the lead times are dramatically different depending on physically where someone is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a couple screenshots here real quick because the inventory can be done in a couple different ways. One, the one I'm going to show on the screen right now is when there are multiple vendors potentially sourcing the exact same product where you can kind of see them side by side in a grid view. And then if you wanted, you could click and add them to a compare engine and compare them side by side to make sure everything's identical. This other view is something that we've added specifically for buying groups and specifically for large bulk purchases like this. And it's called the table view. I think everybody's kind of familiar with the grid and list view, right, Chris? But we've added this custom table view where I'm just going to do a quick search here on an Amazon Echo. And you can see here when I do the search, there's 5 echoes and you can see it in the grid. But when I flip to the list view, you can see this very easily in a single row. So if this was, 5 different vendors sourcing the exact same thing, I could see very quickly, and I'm just using the Amazon Echo as the example, there are 5 different sources to get it. There's potentially 5 different prices and potentially 5 different stock counts. And then, like Chris just led to, is another thing we might want to add to this table for your implementation is lead time. Because if the lead time is very different, as Chris just said, the fulfillment of that might cause a project to not be able to be done on time. If all of a sudden, hey, we got a cheaper price at this place, but the lead time was 3 weeks and we needed it in a week, and it messed everything up on the project. So let's go ahead and talk about the value of that inventory data because we've given a couple examples here now. And so we really want to talk and understand how to manage that data across the different fulfillment partners, right? So it could be centralized, it could be distributed. And then how do we display that data? Is it centralized? Is it distributed, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is pretty interesting stuff. So, we like to joke around about how I went to school for aerospace engineering, and we'll say to clients that your project isn't rocket science, but if it was, we could handle it. Um, I think a lot of folks, especially within buying groups and dealing with multiple vendors, they would agree that it can be very complicated. In particular, getting the different data to come in with very kind of on a spectrum, very different data sources. Some of the vendors are going to be doing things manually. Some of them will use bulk upload techniques. Some will leverage EDI or other API models. And ultimately, we need to be able to aggregate the data across all the different vendors that are part of this network. And this is an opportunity a lot of times to, as this topic implies, the value of inventory data, to basically set a standard with your vendors who are going to be part of this network, part of this buying group, that they can sell into. In order to be part of this group, you have to actually provide your data at this level of integrity, in this level of detail, and this much accuracy, kind of like a tolerance of inventory accuracy. And these are opportunities that you can take on. But one of the other things that is really important is just to keep in mind that in order to offer the most value to the members within the buying group, they have to actually be able to work with the different vendors that they really need to work with. So if some of them just don't have the ability to invest in the APIs, we need to be able to meet them where they're at. So the e-commerce platform that we implement, and we encourage you to kind of look for this as a baseline. It has the ability to allow the vendors to do things really intelligently in their portal. So they can manually go do things. They can clone records. They can update, and they can make changes pretty easily on a manual basis. Now, typically, this isn't going to be the rule that someone's going to want to do this, but as an exception, it's nice to be able to go and do something manually when needed. Now, in addition to that, we can also set basic logic so that, we were talking about this earlier, Ron, offline, that a lot of buying groups, they may work with different vendors that, relatively speaking, have unlimited inventory. And for the purposes of the buying group, we can set something simple like that. So again, we can do things that match the vendor where they're at. But then you also have the situation where a particular vendor may have multiple warehouses, multiple locations, and this can get really challenging to be able to do manually. So we do have the ability to bulk upload, And this is, as the name implies, we can use kind of a template that the vendor can use. They can download their products and then update the inventory counts and then bulk upload that data. Um, Although this is manual, it's a little bit more efficient than doing it one by one. They can also, of course, what we typically recommend, leverage the APIs, EDI. Literally the list goes on. We can take advantage of CXML, other formats that make sense. And so, depending on the scenario, we've worked with a lot of buying groups who actually require or recommend certain ERPs for their vendors. And this is a pretty aggressive step, but depending on the size and clout of the buying group, they can enforce this with the different vendors as a means to kind of standardize the data. I typically wouldn't recommend going that extreme, but we can at least enforce data formats that we require in order to be part of the buying group. So this can be really, really helpful. And then finally, you get into the different locations and the different forms of listing all of this data. So we can look at, do they have multiple locations? For a lot of people that are not familiar with Amazon, whenever they are essentially providing this concept for a lot of users, I mean, in a lot of ways, Amazon provides a form of buying group for their end users. Not exactly the same, but they will accumulate inventory within a distribution center on behalf of the sellers. And this is something that quite a few buying groups will do. Now, this can be really expensive and it may not make sense for your buying group. But the point is that we have the mechanisms in place to be able to handle this type of logic, whether it's the seller who has multiple locations all over the country or all over the world, and being able to track independently all of the inventory at all of the different locations and the time it will take to fulfill those items from those different locations. We can manage that on an individual seller level within this buying group platform. And that is really, really powerful to be able to accurately represent this inventory data. Because kind of what you're doing, Ron, with the inventory data is you're really having to not just show the inventory data, but also some other key meta information. Where is it located? How much reliability do we have on this data? Because, maybe they're selling it in other kind of inputs that they have within their business to sell these products. How accurate is the data? How often is it updated? This kind of a thing.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, a couple points. Riley, my son just bought something and he needed it relatively quickly, and he went and looked, and it said the lead time was 2 to 5 days. And so he bought it, and as they promised, it was shipped within 2 to 5 days, but they didn't tell him it was shipped from China. And it's been sitting in customs now for 3 weeks. And now it's 3.5 weeks later, he still doesn't have the item. So same kind of thing, right? It's just, and that's just one particular item. Another thing you mentioned just real briefly, but browsed past it really quickly, the item, whether it's in stock or not. One of the things we have in our platform that we use for this a lot, we use for digital downloads. And we literally have a toggle where you can go into a product and flip counted or not. It's just, is it counted or not? And if it's a digital download where it's never going to run out of stock, you can flip it to not counted. And then we can display, by default, we display in stock. So anytime they go for a digital download product, it just says in stock. And they're like, great, it's not out of stock. They buy it. They don't know how many there are because it's a digital download. There is no limit, right? But things like that can also be used for this. Now, why might we use that or not? Well, for example, let's say if a vendor has hundreds of thousands of these widgets in stock and they're literally never going to run out, they could just go in and go, I don't want to have to deal with inventory. That is tough to manage the inventory of that many units. I mean, I manage it by, palletfuls. When it gets down to 10 pallets, I order another 50 pallets, right? So they're never going to be out of stock. So they might just want to flip it and go in stock, don't even bother counting them. And that could be very easy. On the other hand, one of the reasons that might be a bad thing is, what if you want to create a sense of urgency and you're trying to show that there are low stock numbers so that people might buy it? If you just show that it's in stock and they don't know that it's a limited number and they might run out, then there's no urgency there and you haven't done that. So you kind of have to be careful of what your strategy is. What are the buying habits of the purchasing group, right? Do they buy in bulk and they buy at 100 at a time? You probably want to show stock count because they really want to make sure that there's at least 100 in stock. And if so, if I'm buying 100, what's the lead time? Where's it coming from? How much is it going to cost to ship? Is it going to be here? Do I know? Do I see on the screen one that just says in stock versus the one from Chris's store that says 213 in stock? I'm probably going to buy the one for 213 because at least I know with Chris's store, they're being purchased and Chris is tracking and giving me an accurate count, where the other one just says it's in stock and they may have 1,000 and may be much more reliable. But just even the fact that there's a more up-to-date, accurate number might give me the confidence I need to buy. So there are definitely some strategies around that. And really what that is managing the queue. Sometimes we call it queue management, but it's really how do you track and ensure that you've got the right reporting, the right display, the right numbers in stock. So Chris, go ahead and shred this a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about managing the stock.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ron. And this is probably the fundamental issue with inventory whenever you look at a buying group, because like you said with Riley, in the case where, the information presented implied a 3 to 5 or 2 to 5 day lead time for him to receive the item. If at any point the trust is broken within the buying group, you're talking about large purchases that are critical for most businesses. If they do not receive them on time, they are going to end the relationship or quietly go away and reduce their volume of purchases. That's just how it works. They don't have time to get into the details, into the weeds, most of the buyers. Now, you'll have some that'll be vocal about it, but in most cases, they're going to just quietly disappear. And this is kind of the method of feedback in reality. And so the integrity of the data has to be extremely high. And so that's what we would, kind of point out to you overall as the manager of the buying group. And really what we're looking to do with this software implementation whenever we work with buying groups. As one of the key aspects, we want to look at how can we use buffers to make sure that depending on the different vendors, we're intelligently setting buffers that are going to manage the expectations of the buyers. Now, we don't want to get into a situation where we don't sell anything ever. That is another extreme of the spectrum that doesn't really help the buyers either. But ultimately, the integrity of the platform has to be the utmost importance to us delivering the software and setting everything up, and to your team, the buying group or group purchasing organization. And so using buffers can really help with this. So an example of this would be that, vendor A sells thousands of items, but they're constantly running out. They're constantly, running into lead time issues, and we're using notifications. We're using kind of feedback and expectation management within the platform, but it's still causing a major issue with customers. So they might be selling a lot, but they're causing a lot of problems. So in this particular case, we could just simply increase the buffer for their inventory. And we could do this respectively so that if they had 10 items they're saying are in inventory, we only show it as 4. If they're saying that they have 100 items, we only show it as 40. Now, this may end up being something that we tune as we progress. And this is a really interesting opportunity to take advantage of if we want, leveraging machine learning or AI to intelligently make these adjustments based on settings and configuration that we can precisely match to each particular kind of scenario, and kind of have a starting place, and then allow the AI or the machine learning mechanism to basically figure out what's happening with this particular vendor and set a intelligent queue or buffer and kind of like watch them or babysit them. And this, again, helps preserve the integrity of the platform. Heck, I would even say just knowing that this is something that's part of the buying group platform is that there is a watchdog, and that there is either an AI based or human based, but AI assisted determination of what's the best buffer per vendor. That is so huge because now I'm going to know, okay, this vendor has a very reliable track record. They take it very seriously. Or, oh my gosh, this vendor is very risky. And these are things that within the buying group platform, we can actually show this to the buyer. We can say, hey, this is a really good deal, but this particular vendor has a really bad track record. Unfortunately, here's their track record. So just like go at it knowing that. We can also do things that help buffer with the lead time. So, not just the inventory count, but the lead time in a very similar manner. The other things that are pretty interesting are we can leverage the ability to kind of show this low inventory to create urgency. So, we're not just trying to have this very high integrity experience. We're also trying to operate the business and make sure that it can flow that inventory through the system for these vendors. We need to be able to attract the different vendors to the buying group. And in order to do that, we need the buyers to actually buy things and get that inventory sold. And so one of the things that we can do is as we kind of tune in that kind of buffer and we get close to being low on inventory, we can let the members know either via notification or display on the screen. We can create some urgency around the lower inventory levels. Again, especially with high credibility inventory count vendors. And then another really interesting thing is a lot of these vendors will have items in stock, but they'll be part of a kit. So an example of this might be like a pool heater, and the pool heater has a piece on it, a component within the pool heater itself that is also separately sold on the site. Well, let's say the pool heater itself, the overall kit that would be a pool heater, there are 100 of those in inventory, but the little valve that is part of the pool heater that is also sold separately only has 5 in inventory, and a buyer needs 20 of those. Well, it's also possible for us to kind of decompose these kits and show inventory as being available from a kit that can be broken. And maybe there's an additional cost or handling or service fee to do that. But this again encourages the vendors because the vendors want to sell their inventory and they may be willing to break that kit apart in order to continue to flow that inventory through their system, especially if they're getting a fixed fee every time, right, Ron?
Yeah. And you mentioned a couple of really good ones there about potentially buffering, right? And it was to try to help the vendor to make sure that they keep things in stock. And I had a couple other thoughts because there's a couple other tips and strategies there too. So you mentioned potentially buffering. So if they had 40, if they had 100, say there's 40, right? So that they do that. And then the other one you said was potentially increase the lead time. Another one might be is to change the low stock notification. Maybe with that vendor, they typically stock 100, and then we set up a low stock notification that as soon as they get down to 10, it automatically triggers a notification to them so they can reorder and start stocking some more. And they're always late. They never stock them fast enough. So we bump that up. When they get down to 30, we force them to reorder. How do you enforce that? And now the fourth tip, rules of engagement. Maybe you give them 3 strikes, right? If you run out of stock 3 times and the buying group can't buy your product, then you're no longer able to stock that particular product because you can't fulfill it to our buying group's needs. So maybe part of the thing is, your first strike, we'll go in and set and adjust a low stock notification and we'll bump that up, right? You didn't have a notification, so now you have to have a notification. So they put one on. They run out of stock a second time. Maybe we bump up their lead time. Maybe we lower you also mentioned another one, lowering their score. They're no longer a power seller, right? They get demoted to average score, or maybe they're, a little even more intense, red, yellow, and green. Maybe they're a yellow supplier, which is a warning, right? They may not fulfill in time. And then part of the rule of engagement, if they run out of stock a third time, you take them up. I mean, you can imagine if that happened with Costco, yeah, you just wouldn't be getting Costco anymore, would you? You'd lose your biggest seller. Walmart wouldn't put up with that. Costco wouldn't put up with that. So you have to think about that. If they're trusting you to come in and service their buyers, you need to ensure that you can service the buyers. and stock and inventory and lead times is even more important than pricing and almost anything, information about the product, pictures and everything. I mean, most people know what they want to buy. They know about what it's going to cost. They might even go to somebody a little more expensive if they can trust they can get the quantity they need in time for a job, right? Especially contractors. You used pool parts. Can you imagine a pool manufacturer working on a pool at the JW Marriott that's a $3 million pool, and they can't get their equipment for 3 weeks, how much that would cost, and the hotel probably has, and I've seen this. I remember I lived in Utah, and the DOT, the Department of Transportation, they used to put out bids to redo sections of highway. And I remember reading some of the bonds they would put out, and there would be bonuses of like, $250,000 a day if they could get it done earlier and ahead of time schedule. And these guys would literally have their crews walk off other private jobs and all come on this. And it would say, $3.25 million bonus paid out because so-and-so got this done, 2.5 weeks ahead. Well, of course they are, right? So this is a really, really super important one. So I think that kind of ties it up. Want to thank everybody for doing it. I'm going to give you a second to close up. Next webinar, we're going to be talking about pricing group benefits. What is pricing groups? Well, Costco has an executive membership and then a standard membership. You might have multiple tiers. You might have quantity breaks where, you buy 10 items, you have one price, but if you buy over 100, you might have free shipping over something else, even though these are LTL and they're huge things and they're trucking. And so shipping can be thousands of dollars. So you might have additional things where any purchase over $10,000 is shipped for free. So it might be a completely different thing than a traditional retail or purchase on Amazon. So that's it for me, Chris. You want to send us off?
Absolutely. I would just say just exactly what you said. And one of the things that we really enjoy about this industry is the experience that we have. We can distill that to potential clients. If you're watching this and you think that there is a potential that we can provide value to you directly, feel free to reach out. We offer a complimentary discovery process that's really detailed. We also have a lot of additional resources that we're happy to share. And we really are an abundant company just as far as our philosophy. So if we can help you, great. And if there's a good fit for us to work together, even better. But if not, we're always happy to kind of send you along with the information that we have that can be helpful. And either way, we ask that if you found this video helpful, if you would smash the like button, hit subscribe, and we will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye for now.